Hi nurses, Amy Deagle here, founder and CEO of the International Network of Nurse Leaders and host of the Shift Change podcast. Welcome back to another episode. If this is your first time here, welcome. If you've joined us before, welcome back. And whether you're here for the first time or you've heard several of our episodes, I just want to take a moment and appreciate you being here, spending the time with us. And I have a huge favor to ask. If you would mind going over to whatever device or streaming app that you are listening to this podcast on and leaving us a rating or a review for the show, I would so greatly appreciate it. You know, it's 2020, it's Year of the Nurse and the Midwife. We're celebrating all these incredible nurses. We've moved up to weekly production to share even more incredible nurses with you. And I just want to make sure that the word is getting out there. So if you would share it, if you would rate us and review us, I would be so grateful. I'm just so honored to be bringing you all these incredible guests. And it is really the best part of my day is meeting and connecting with these nurses that I have on the show and helping them share their stories, because every nurse has such incredible stories. No matter what area we work in, no matter how long we've been a nurse, we have the ability to impact people's lives in such an incredible way. And our stories matter. They're important. So I'm really honored to be able to share them with you. The story that Justin shares at the end of this episode is so incredibly impactful. I can't wait to hear the feedback and just your guys's take on it. It stayed with me for weeks after he shared it, and just what an amazing experience that would have been and how impactful that's been on his life. So I'm really excited for you guys to listen to the interview with Justin. Justin and I are actually have met as we are both provincial counselors with the College and Association of Registered Nurses for Alberta. So we get to be working together in Alberta, which is really great. Justin Burkett is a full-time instructor with the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Calgary with experience in international and clinical nursing education, emergency nursing, and healthcare simulation. Justin is a member of the Clinical Simulation Learning Center at the Faculty of Nursing with a special interest in mindfulness in the simulation environment. When not teaching, Justin is an active community volunteer, political activist, and was just elected to a 3-year term as a provincial councillor at the College and Association of Registered Nurses of Alberta. An avid runner and yogi, Justin also enjoys spending time outdoors with his dog Max, enjoying the beautiful nature in and around his hometown of Calgary, Alberta. He is currently pursuing postgraduate studies in leadership for health systems transformation as part of the new Masters of Nursing Stackable Certificates program at the University of Calgary. Justin, welcome to the Shift Change podcast, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you very much, Amy. Thank you for that introduction.
So, Justin, I told everybody in the intro that you and I connected via Twitter and through a mutual nursing friend, and that now we're provincial counselors together. And so I just want to hear more about your nursing career and your journey into nurse leadership. Can you walk us through your journey and some of the highlights you've had thus far? Because you've had a very interesting career.
Yeah, it's definitely been a non-linear career. I was working overseas recently, and one of my colleagues had a picture on the door of her office with an X and a Y graph, and there was one line was linear going up, and the other line had a sort of a curvature, and one said, "This is life, and this is what actually happens in life," and that's definitely been how my nursing career has evolved. I guess I got into nursing sort of later in life than other people. I started nursing in 2010, doing my undergraduate training at the Medicine Hat College and that satellite campus of the University of Calgary program. So we were Medicine Hat College students for the first 2 years, and then we applied to U of C and graduate with our degree from the University of Calgary. And then after that, I graduated from there. And I moved to Calgary. I did my final preceptorship at the Rocky View Hospital on Unit 73 and 74. And I stayed there for 1 year. And then I was really die hard to get into the emergency environment. I had done some schooling as paramedic before I had gone into nursing, transferred into nursing. So I was sort of familiar with that emergency environment, and it spoke to me already. So I fought hard to get an interview at the South Health Campus Hospital. I just really wanted to work there. It was a new hospital, new technology. It was a really exciting environment, and I just wanted to be a part of that whole energy that was going on down there. So I sent in, I think, 100 applications over the year while I was at Rocky View Hospital. And the manager at the time, I remember her saying during our interview, she said, do you know why you're sitting here? And I said, well, you got my resume. And she said, Justin, I got all 100 of them. I just finally had to meet you. So I thought, I didn't know how the conversation was going to go after that, but she did offer me a casual position, and eventually I did wind up taking a line. For those viewers who don't know, that's more of a permanent position with permanent hours in Alberta Health Services. And then I did that for very briefly. I actually graduated from my nursing undergraduate in December 2013. I was in the accelerated program at the Medicine College, so it was 3.5 years instead of 4 years. And then I worked only for a couple years in the emergency department, more or less full time. And then one of the instructors at the University of Calgary, he was floating some students through, and he said, hey, have you ever considered teaching before? Because I was sort of excited that these nursing students were around, and I was like, hey, you should come look at these things and let me teach you these things. And I was just really, I guess, excited to teach them what I had known as a recent graduate. We sort of connected because we were closer together in our training, I guess. So I took his advice, and I was in an interview at the University of Calgary shortly thereafter, and I was offered a position, and I started, I believe, with them in the 2016. I taught clinical nursing education at South Health Campus primarily. That was my base of operations. I kept a casual position in the ER. And then I was sort of weirdly happened. I was happily teaching as a clinical instructor. And the associate dean at the time of the University of Calgary, he called me in for a meeting in his office, and he said, sort of have an opportunity that's presented itself, and I wanted to know if you wanted to take it. And it was an opportunity to go to Doha in Qatar in the Persian Gulf, which is a small little country that sits on the southeast corner of Saudi Arabia, for people who don't know where Qatar might be. And it was to essentially, we're running for several years a program where we have a faculty actually in Doha that lives and works in Doha and teaches the local regional nurses in their healthcare system. And then part of that relationship is the University of Calgary sends nursing students to Doha. What they did at the time, we've currently paused the program for a reevaluation. But at the time, we were sending 4 students a month, roughly, to Doha from September to April. And there was an instructor that went over with them and provided their education, or helped to assist in their education during their final preceptorship in Doha. So anyways, so this opportunity came up, and I thought, I guess I'll phone my brother and see if he can look after my dog. And so I phoned my brother, and he said, sure. And off I was to the Middle East. And I did that for, I thought I was only going to do that for 4 months, the one semester. But then they invited me back for a full-time 1-year contract. And I went back for another full academic year. And I just actually returned from Doha in May of this year, and have started now really teaching full-time with the University of Calgary and embarking on my academic career, as well as starting on graduate studies. And yeah, that's, I guess, where I'm at in my career right now.
And like I said, it's been an incredible career in different things in such a short period of time. I just wanted to make a mention of, that story of sending 100 resumes to get into Emerge. I had a similar story. I was in a small town in Alberta and had heard that there was a hospital, High River, Alberta, where you could be rural and just do labor and delivery. And I must have sent probably close to 30 resumes via fax there. And finally, and wouldn't hear anything back. And so the one day I just decided to drive there and walked in, asked to meet with the manager, and got a casual position on the spot. But it just goes to show, if you want something to happen bad enough in your career, that perseverance and that unrelenting will not to give up really does help you get ahead, because there's lots of people that throw out one resume and think, oh, it didn't work, it wasn't meant to be, and they give up. So I love that you have that story as well of perseverance to get what you want.
Yeah, you have to. I think one of your former guests, I love listening to your podcast, by the way. I think it was Barb Shelley, and mentioned something about persistent perseverance, or I can't remember the exact lingo that was used, but it's definitely, you just have to keep, if there's something burning inside of you, some passion, you just have to keep going for it. And, when everything comes together, it comes together in a great way.
Yeah. So I just want to, you mentioned, that you had been in Doha, Qatar. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to know, what was that experience like? What was it like taking students over there? What's the culture of nursing like over there? Can you just tell us a little bit more about your experience? Because I think that's fascinating.
Yeah. Doha was, I started during when I was working in the emergency department in Calgary, I started to really get interested in how nurses could affect change on a system level, and just seeing the repeat folks coming back in the emergency department and the way things were running, that's kind of was the correct time that I met Dave from the University of Calgary, who said I should come teach, because I thought, now maybe rather than trying to affect change at the bedside, I can affect change on a different level, and really make some systemic changes, if you will, from this academic standpoint. So that was part of my motivation for taking that. And it wasn't until Doha that I really got passionate about how nurses can affect change anywhere they are around the world. Think local, act global. Mm-hmm. When we were there as students, initially I thought it was in their final preceptorship when we went over. So they went over for 1 month of their 3-month final preceptorship. And the initial way that this was conducted was they would fly over and they would meet with their primary RN that they would be working with in the hospitals. And then my role as the instructor was sort of to facilitate that relationship and that education that they were experiencing, filling any gaps in their knowledge. While I was there, I started to see the amazing things that nurses were doing in Doha. Doha is this amazing melting pot. I think I've been told that there's somebody from everywhere on earth in Doha. It is an international cosmopolitan city like I have seen nowhere else. And there are so many nurses there from all over the world, from the Philippines, from India, from the region in Jordan, from Oman, from Saudi Arabia, from Canada, from England, from Russia. I mean, there's nurses just literally everywhere. And the students that the University of Calgary and Qatar are teaching are students from like Yemen and, again, Saudi Arabia, from Israel, from Syria. And these young nurses have such a burning desire to affect change in their communities through the voice that they are developing as nurses. And I thought, wow, this is an amazing opportunity for our students to engage with nurses on this level of internationalization, if you will, and to have these conversations about how nursing is done in Canada, how nursing is done in Doha, how nursing is done in the Philippines, how nursing is done in Saudi Arabia, how nursing is done in Yemen, and how collectively the outcome of those conversations is driving change on a global scale. And we see this as evidenced, with the Nursing Now campaign and the WHO campaign, or the WHO Nursing Now campaign raising that nursing profile and that nursing status. And it was there that I really started to become passionate about nursing leadership and what I can do as an instructor and an academic to influence the young nursing minds in a positive and constructive way that are going to be really reshaping the healthcare system of tomorrow. And since I've come back to Calgary, that has really been my primary motivation. I saw an opportunity at Karna. I stuck my neck out. I campaigned for that and got that. So that's another way that I was looking to raise the status of nursing and influence in a positive way, also through the teaching now. So I'm always looking for opportunities where nurses can step in and interject themselves so that I can disseminate that information to my students.
I love that. And, I think a lot of nurses don't realize that not only is leadership a career path in nursing, but that as nurses, we have the ability to really be leaders at the bedside, at a point of care, contact with patients, in our communities, in our provincial organizations or state organizations, and even expanding further into politics and stuff. So if somebody was interested in leadership, what advice would you give them about how they can start onto that leadership track, whether it's an official route into leadership management positions or just being more of a leader every day? What advice would you have for those nurses on how to get more involved in leadership?
So this is a question that if you had asked me this question 2 months ago, I think it would have given you a vastly different answer. Since I have started the Stackable Certificate program in leadership at the University of Calgary, I have been introduced to theories around complexity leadership and influencing and how leaders influence. And leadership and influence, goes together on how you're influencing people to create conditions, to focus on innovation, to generate that capacity building. And that all starts from the self. Brené Brown, in her book, if people are familiar with her Daring to Lead book, she talks about leading from the self. And first we have to work on ourselves in order to be able to lead others. We have to be aware of our blind spots. We have to be aware of what things might cause us to armor up, to disengage, to close our doors, to dig in deeper, so that we are able to better navigate our emotional response to environments that we might be placed in as leaders. So when I'm looking at leadership these days, and this is just from only being in 2 months, so I don't have all the answers right now, I am really questioning if there is a linear path to leadership, because a linear path to leadership to me means that we are starting from the bottom to work to the top. But what we're trying to do as leadership and leaders in the future is to break down that hierarchical structure that really was created during the Industrial Revolution. So, and put leaders really into a system where they're able to influence on a multi-dimensional platform. So the flow information is not flowing up and down, but it is flowing around. And for leaders to recognize leadership in others so that other people can lead, sort of sharing the leadership, if you will. So I guess my advice to students is to do the hard work, to look inside, to ask the questions of who I am, what type of person I am, and what type of world I want to see. And then from that place, to apply those principles that they've learned into all situations. I think people are afraid, or maybe not afraid, but I think people think that, well, I'm just a nurse at the bedside here, and my unit manager is 3 flights of stairs up. And for me to get from the bedside up those 3 flights of stairs, I have to become a charge nurse, or I have to graduate level education, or I have to go through this person, or wait for this person to quit, or this person to retire. The barriers that we place on ourselves thinking that we can't be leaders until we get through all of those, I think does us a real disservice. And the real truth of the matter is that we are all leaders all of the time. And if you want to be a leader, I think that is the key principle to remember.
Yeah, I agree. And that concept, I mentioned it in my Not Just a Nurse Day keynote, is that as nurses, we have the ability to demonstrate everyday leadership. And whether that's through connections with our patients, our colleagues, our staff, our community as a whole, we have that ability to influence people, show kindness, show compassion, and really be that change for good and a positive change in the world, because we can make those interactions with our patients more meaningful. We can show kindness and compassion to strangers. And it really is, everyday acts of kindness and just going that little bit above and beyond that can really impact somebody's life. And I love that you mentioned Brené Brown and her Daring to Lead book and Knowing Self. And so I just want to see if there's any other go-to resources that you use to help support you on your leadership journey as well, because she's definitely one that I also use, but I'm always fascinated to see what other resources people are drawn to.
Yeah. Right now, I'm doing my graduate program, so a lot of the resources that I'm using in my life are directly coming out of the graduate program that I'm doing. There's this fellow by the name of Otto Schammer, and he teaches it at MIT, I believe, and he has formulated this Presencing Institute where he talks about leadership capacities and the 7 leadership capacities of, being able to listen and to observe and to sense and to sort of, listen to what other people are saying to you in order to generate ideas together, if you will. My professor, she just released a textbook, Sandra Davidson, on leadership principles with her co-author, Dan Weber, I believe his name is. And so I'm using a lot of those principles or those resources these days to guide myself in my leadership journey. I also listen to a lot of podcasts. I quite like Dan Harris, 10% Happier. There's always really good conversations on podcasts on how to work through your personal journey and how to really get in touch with kind of the principles that Brené Brown speaks of. So I'm always, looking for those edgy podcasts with people who've gone through struggles, business leaders, entrepreneurs, innovators, where they really explore, I thought I couldn't do this, but I struggled and I struggled and I struggled and I persevered and then I achieved. So I'm always looking for sort of those conversations on, how the underdog was able to sort of rise above and push through and persevere. And my colleagues, I think a large part of my resources for leadership come from bouncing ideas off my colleagues. I work with some amazing people at the University of Calgary. They have some really great ideas, and a lot of really great ideas come out of just sitting around and having coffee. And, you don't have to necessarily go to read the latest New York Times bestseller on whatever leadership guru is releasing whatever theory of the day to really enact change and be leaders in a localized way. And a lot of just happens naturally through conversations. A leader or leadership principles or ideas emerge from dialogue and listening. So relationships, podcasts, reading this and that, Harvard Business Review, these types of things. And I use those to all influence.
Love it. So I just wanted to go back to one thing that you had mentioned, what your focus is right now within your role as an educator at the University of Calgary. And I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about what is clinical simulation and the mindfulness in the simulation environment that you mentioned. What does that look like and involve and entail? Because I know when I was a nursing student, that wasn't a thing. So I'm sure there's lots of people out there that aren't sure of what that exactly entails and means. So could you just walk us through a bit of that?
Sure, yeah. You didn't have sim in your undergrad?
Not to the level that I think you guys have it now.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I guess it's evolved quite a bit over the years. I absolutely love it. I used to do stage acting when I was a teenager and in my early 20s in Medicine Hat, Alberta. Nothing paid. So I was really always involved in sort of dramatization. And when I was briefly doing paramedic studies in Medicine Hat, a large portion of my training involved simulation. Often we would get to school and there would be a mock scene that we would have to sort of navigate through with mannequins and these things. So I was introduced to simulation then, and then now that I'm reflecting, I actually don't think we either used it as much as we do now when I was doing my undergrad. We had those old IV arms, which you practice on, which I'm sure you remember, which feels nothing like an actual person, and those types of things. And then over in Doha, I did a little bit of simulation before I left for Doha, but very briefly. But in Doha, I really was connected to a phenomenal simulation team over there. They use simulation quite actively to teach their students because, for example, male students in Doha would never work in a maternity environment. So because they're University of Calgary students, we provide them with our nursing curriculum. So they have to learn maternity, which all of them love learning about. And the unfortunate thing is they can't practice. So they learn a lot of their maternity skills in simulation. What we tried to do with the students that I brought over from Canada is to provide them with cultural education in a simulated environment. So we would run like a language barrier simulation, for example, where we would have maybe a patient speaking Egyptian, and the patients would have to try to communicate with this person or introduce cultural elements into the room that they would have to navigate around as a means to sort of, prepare them for what they were going to experience in the hospital. And then when I came, so I sort of got interested in the way simulation could be applied to cultural learning in nursing. And then when I got back to Calgary, I was invited to join the CSLC team, the Clinical Simulation Learning Center team. I believe there's 10 of us, if memory serves. And we are a core group of instructors that help to facilitate the simulation education that is being done at the University of Calgary. There's been a ton of research that has supported replacing or using simulation as an additional learning tool for clinical context, but it can also be used for a wide variety of purposes. I think the simulations we run for mental health, for example, where we bring in actual standardized patients, trained actors and actresses that we share with Cummings School of Medicine that provide that realism when they're doing some of their mental health assessments that a robot couldn't provide, for example. So my role really there is, again, one of the facilitators. We have, I think, one of the most advanced simulation suites in Western Canada currently for a School of Nursing. It's a huge advantage for us. We're very excited about all that we're able to do there. We have mannequins that can cry. We have a robot, if you will, that delivers, so we can go through the entire birthing process, and with the students, they can auscultate lung sounds, heart sounds. They can check pulses on a lot of our mannequins. And then we sit behind in the control room through a glass where we can see the students, but they can't see us. And we can manipulate all of these variables and these vital signs so we can take patients on their physiological journey, maybe from arriving onto shift and the patient feeling not so well to having them feeling quite unwell towards the end of the scenario, if you will. So lots of really exciting things happening in simulation with virtual reality too. The goggle technology and is coming. A lot of the software manufacturers are still working to get that out. So we're excited for that to appear. In terms of the mindfulness in simulation that I became interested in, I actually became interested in this topic in Doha. I myself, an avid yogi for a number of years, have naturally used mindfulness in my own life, just on a day-to-day basis. And I was in Doha, and I was at a conference, and there was a lady speaking about implicit bias. Oh, no, it was a workshop, actually. We had video conferenced in a professor from the University of Calgary to Doha, and she was hosting a conversation about implicit bias. And I thought, hey, we can use this in sim, I thought, as a means to improve students' potential assessments, because I had students coming from one culture into another culture, and whether they were aware of it or not, we do have implicit bias. We do have unconscious thoughts that influence the way we interact with people. And I thought through some simple mindfulness exercises, maybe I could catch or work with the students to help them catch some of those thoughts that could be influencing their assessments, conversations, actions. So back at the University of Calgary here now, I'm working on a proposal to introduce mindfulness into the simulation environment, just some basic techniques that we're looking at adopting, and then maybe down the road we can do research in those things. This is very early stages right now, but there has been quite a bit of research that has been done around mindfulness in the simulation environment. And what's really been fascinating is, in addition to the implicit bias piece, is when mindfulness is introduced before the simulation experience, when students go into debriefing, their memory about the environment, the thoughts they had at specific moments is much more vivid because they were able to take that step back and really be present when they were doing the simulation, as opposed to being in that flight or fight response, where the horse blinders go on. You just get in, you get it done, and then you have no idea what happened. So I'm really quite interested in mindfulness and simulation for those two specific reasons: to be able to catch those implicit biases before they influence us, and to be able to enhance the debriefing process.
Hey nurses, I just wanted to take a quick break from the podcast and tell you about something really important that's happening. So 2020 has been designated as Year of the Nurse and the Midwife. And it's really great to be celebrating nurses and to be sharing trending hashtags. But what we really need to do is get into action, because it's up to us. And nothing is going to change if we don't make the change. So there's a movement happening and it needs you. We're stronger together. So come join us as we disrupt the status quo and evolve our profession. It's time. We are stronger together, so let's get started. If you want to know how you can join this movement of change, visit nurseleaders.ca/2020nurse to opt in for a free 3-part video series about how we can use 2020, the Year of the Nurse and Midwife, as the year we finally use our collective voice and lead our profession forward. So jump over to nurseleaders.ca/2020nurse for all the details. Now back to the episode. I want to pick your brain for a second, with gender bias in nursing. As a male in a heavily female-dominated profession, what has your experience been being a point of care bedside nurse and now into, more leadership educator type roles? How has your experience been? And have you faced the same challenges, do you think, that women face getting into leadership positions? Do you notice a difference based on what you were kind of expected to do in your career? Do you want to talk us through that piece?
Yes, this is an interesting question, and I read this question on your interview questions actually, and I've been having conversations with some of my female colleagues about this very topic, and I don't know, I haven't really. I don't know if I've been unaware or, there's also that notion about nurses eating their young that comes up. And I've been totally unaware of this too. And I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues, and we were talking about this nursing eating the young. And I said, where the heck does this come from? And because I said, is this a male thing? Is this, am I oblivious to this as a male nurse? Because I haven't experienced this. And she said to me, that is totally right, Justin. She said, this has nothing to do with nursing and more to do with how females interact with each other sometimes. And so that led to a very interesting conversation about, and then that led to, well, yeah, I guess me and other men sort of in the way we socialize can be a little bit heated sometimes too, right? Like we're always sort of trying to outdo each other and get to the top of the pile. So it sort of became an interesting conversation about how the sexes communicate with each other and how we socialize with each other and how we, work together in environments. And I think nursing is just really, because it is a female dominated profession, it's a microcosm of female socialization. If you look at politics, if you look at like all of the premiers, for example, we have all male premiers. When you have all men in a room, it can be very headbutted and more heated, if you will. And it's really the best working environments that I've been in are those where there's sort of closer to a 50% split, where we are able to elevate each other's greatest qualities, if you will, and come to solutions together to look at both sides of the coin. So so this is a really interesting topic of conversation, and I think it could receive a lot of merit in terms of leadership and moving through the channels. I have found it, would like to think, just as challenging as my female colleagues to move through to, especially in academia. Academia is a challenging environment to move through because there is such dated hierarchical structures in academia. I laugh sometimes, we have all of the greatest minds and all of the most ancient ways of doing things. And so my struggles are not, I don't think my gender comes into play with that in my environment, or unless I'm maybe oblivious to it.
No, I was just asking your experience because following my podcast interview with Patrick, it really opened up my eyes because he had mentioned, he found a bias against the male nurses that wanted to stay in bedside or point of care positions. Like, why weren't they wanting to move up? And he felt like he had been accelerated into a career track into leadership very quickly without as much challenge to why he would want to be doing that as he felt some of his female colleagues had experienced. And so it just opened up this conversation of, we absolutely have gender biases within nursing. It's a heavily female dominated profession. And I was just curious as to what your experience was. So thank you for sharing. So I just want to kind of, within that focus of challenges facing nursing today, what do you think is one of the biggest challenges and frustrations we're facing, and how might we go about solving that challenge as nurses?
There's a lot of challenges facing healthcare industry in general, but nursing in particular. I think registered nurses in particular are facing a real identity crisis right now. If we look at Alberta, especially with the increased scope of practice for licensed practical nurses, RNs used to be able to guard our practice through our scope and our skills, but that isn't the case anymore. And I think that's happened because technology does a lot for us now, that maybe, we were able to give more people more responsibilities because technology makes it safer to be able to do that. Whereas before we might have needed more theoretical background, let's say. So that's one challenge. Another challenge, I think, is really, so it's sort of the identity crisis. Another challenge, I think, comes from nurses being, how do I say, I've been talking to a lot of nurses about this lately. Nurses need to feel reconnected to their profession again. I think we, again, because of technology and automation and industrial models and these things, nurses, the bulk of us, maybe those who don't work in primary care, but like a lot of those nurses who work in hospitals, let's say, or clinics, they go through nursing school. They're armed with all of this fabulous education about the social determinants of health, population health needs. We're trained from a holistic model. We know how to take care of babies. We know how to take care of 150-year-olds. we know how to focus on wellness, like the breadth of nursing education. I don't know another profession, to be honest with you, that really has the breadth of education that we have in terms of managing population health. And you leave nursing school with all of this excitement and step into a system that confines you to task-based work. And I think the challenge is allowing nurses the autonomy and the ability to be nurses, to do what they were trained to do, to keep populations well, to help manage disease. Doctors treat disease, nurses keep populations well. This is kind of the way I look at it. And we should be working together synergistically to do this. So yeah, those are two big things for me in nursing right now. Solutions, that's a big one. In terms of reconnecting, I believe that I'm quite optimistic about. I'm actually really excited about the future, with Connect Care and these sort of technologies coming that are giving patients a level of access to their care that they never had before, I believe is an opportunity for registered nurses to jump into. Not just like jump into, but step into, because we are really the only profession that is trained in such a way where I just get so excited about. I envision an army of registered nurses unleashed onto the population with their iPads. The struggles that people have to even get to a hospital or to appointment, and a doctor's appointment for some people, are insurmountable, right? You have a person who's just gotten out of hip surgery or what have you. They're at home. They have to have a follow-up appointment. They're on crutches. They have to get into the taxi or the car to get across town and spend money to get out of the car, to be assisted into the hospital, to sit for hours more, to be seen for a 5-minute appointment, and to go home again. This is totally unnecessary with current technology and with registered nurses. Nurses can be sent into people's homes to do follow-ups, to do referrals, to be the guardians of the healthcare system, if you will, to refer on to nurse practitioners, to refer on to neurologists, to, even go through basic medication information and education in the person's homes, and be empowered to practice nursing in that way. So I believe that is an avenue that nursing can explore for reconnecting to what we've actually been trained to do. Because what we've actually been trained to do is to care for society. And what we're doing now is taking medications out of an automated drug dispenser and spiking IV bags a lot of days. And we need those nurses. We need those critical care nurses, absolutely 100%. But we also need nurses to be practicing nursing in their communities. And I think that's a real positive thing to look forward to in the future.
Right. So as a leader in the nursing profession, what change do you hope to impact? What do you want your legacy to be, Justin?
Yeah, I think it's this raising the voice of nursing and to find meaning in one's work again. These are two huge areas for me that I'm trying to figure out how to do as a nurse, to be, because like you said, nurses don't often know that they have the power to affect change, but we do have the power to affect change. And I think nurses need to be able to see other nurses, such as yourself with this brilliant podcast, affecting that change, right? It's sort of like young girls watching, TV and seeing those politicians, those female politicians, I forget the one young lady in the United States Senate right now, that empowers them and they watch the televisions and they think, oh my gosh, like that's something that I can do. So I think we need more nurses to be occupying those higher level positions that gain them some media presence, if you will, so that other nurses can aspire to do those things, like, oh, I didn't know I could actually run for office, or I didn't know that Kearney even had a provincial council, those types of things. So definitely that's one area that I'm focused on. And then the reconnection thing. When I was a practicing nurse, in the emergency department, I cared deeply for my patients and my profession and what I could offer. And I always felt a little bit trapped by, a large, and it's the systems we've created. Like, for example, the charting system. I don't think there was a nurse involved in the development of most of our charting systems, because if there had been, I don't think they would be this way. We have developed a system that has removed the nurse from the bedside, where they are trained to care and manage for their patients. We have to sit at a computer. We have to quickly jot down as much information as we can. Then we have to run into a patient's room and we have to do their care. But we can't stay too long because we have to run back out the door so that we can fill in the ticky boxes. Nursing needs to be reconnected to our core in order to evolve into what society is asking of us. And I believe that society is asking for nurses to be more present in their homes, in their lives, in their healthcare decision making in a way that we weren't before. But now that, as I joke, technology has caught up to nursing, we can be.
So the International Network of Nurse Leaders was proud to present Not Just a Nurse Day in October, and it featured nurses from all over the world who are ready to shed that just a nurse mentality and shift into powerful agents for change. So what do you think of the just a nurse mentality? Why is it so prevalent? And what do we do to stop that and really use our voice? You've mentioned that several times today, that we need to step up as leaders and really be that force for change. So yeah, why are we downplaying ourselves as just a nurse all the time?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I refused to be just the nurse when I was a practicing nurse. I proudly walked into, I wore the RN pin. I had all of those things. I still wear the RN pin. I stepped into patient's room. I said, "My name's Justin. I will be your registered nurse today." I think this isn't the fault of the nurses. I think this is a system fault, right? And I've mentioned it previously in this conversation a little bit, is we work in a system where people, when I'm speaking of this, I'm speaking largely of hospitals and clinics and these places where patients come for treatment of some disease process. And the people that are, I guess, in our current model, overseeing this, providing the disease treatment, are physicians. And that's their job, absolutely. But what nurses fall into the habit of is always waiting for what the doctor says and their orders. I see it with my students. They're sitting around waiting for the flag to pop up. And I look at them and I say, what are you doing? And they say, well, there's nothing to do. There's no orders. And I said, do you need an order to be a nurse? And they sort of look at me. Well, I guess not, right? So nurses have an enormous amount of things that they can do autonomously and independently to care for people. Physicians have their responsibilities, nurses have our responsibilities. A lot of them overlap. We work together synergistically. We are beautifully complementary professions. Nurses need to do more to do what they're trained to do, to be empowered to do what they're trained to do. And I think that nurses think that they always do have to sit around and wait for their orders, but they don't. And I think in order to change the conversation, I think it starts largely with maybe the younger students that are coming up, and us as educators, I believe, have a real pivotal role to play in this, to really get our students to think, behave, act as nurses, to apply nursing principles and theories that they have been trained to do in their daily operations as a nurse, and to view their relationships with physicians and other medical practitioners as complementary to their own, and not as up and down hierarchy, but an integrated multidimensional structure, if you will, where nursing is one aspect of that and has value to provide to the conversation. That has to start from early on. So that's what I would say about that.
Great. So we're nearing the end already. This hour kind of flew by.
Wow.
So is there anything that we haven't touched on today that you would like listeners to know about, or any causes that you wanted to take a minute to champion or bring awareness to?
Yeah, I mean, I would really encourage nurses to pursue graduate level education. And believe me, if you had asked me this a year ago, I would have again given you a different answer. Because I used to believe I was one of those people who used to think, well, why do I need graduate level education? It looks so elitist, and how is that going to change me as a person or a nurse? I just sort of fought it, and it wasn't until I did some online graduate level education while I was in Doha through a university in London, and then I transferred into it was not a very successful experience, and then through conversation with my dean, I reapplied to do the stackable certificates at the University of Calgary. And if this program had not been launched, and I'm not just doing this as a plug for the University of Calgary, this is just meaningful for me. If they had not had this part-time learning opportunity in graduate level education, I would probably not be in graduate level education this year. And had I not been in graduate level education this year, I may have not learned some of the early leadership principles that I have learned so far. And I think it would have been at a real disadvantage. So if nurses are thinking about becoming leaders and affecting change, there is huge, enormous value in graduate level education. I talk to colleagues of mine who tell me verbatim, I became a different, better version of myself in grad school. And now that we have at the University of Calgary this ability to work, I work full time, and I have responsibilities with Karna, as do you, and we all have home and other responsibilities. To be able to work and study sort of part-time in this fashion has really opened my eyes to leadership possibilities in my career. It's actually really exciting. I'm exposed to a whole, it's like, and I think you have your master's and you'll probably be able to comment on this too. It's like being exposed to a whole new way of thinking and a whole new world that you didn't even know existed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, like, education in any form is never a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it, a master's in nursing or just courses that you have interest in, that growth and the continual mindset of being a beginner and learning and pushing your comfort zone, I think is hugely valuable as a leader. And you mentioned it, in the beginning with Brene Brown, that you have to know yourself and you have to know where your limitations are and your blind spots so that you can work on those and grow into a better version of yourself. And so I think that's great. So in closing, can you provide listeners with 3 tangible takeaways or pieces of advice?
3 takeaways or pieces of advice. Whew, yeah. This is a difficult one. Hurry slowly. It's the name of a podcast I'm listening to. So it's a great notion. We live in a world where we think we have to rush towards everything. And I think we miss a lot of things along the way. And again, system and structure has a lot to play in that. So, hurry slowly, be persistent. I think some of your previous guests have mentioned this notion of persistence. If you believe that strongly that you can affect change or do something meaningful in your community or life, stick with it. Many of the greatest successful individuals in life have failed so many times before they were able to achieve their goals. And, Steve Jobs was fired from his own company at one point in time, So, yeah, hurry slowly, be persistent, and stay true to who you are. We live in a world of influence, so much influence. And sometimes our voice can be buried under the never-ending chorus. And it's important to be reflective and mindful and to go on walks in the nature or whatever it is that you do to reconnect to your inner purpose and always keep that alive and well.
I love that. And for anybody that's interested in kind of doing that deep dive into figuring out, where can I serve? What is my purpose? You can go to nurseleaders.ca. And we have membership community. I do coaching, and we also have a leadership challenge going on where we're going to walk through kind of discovering those blind spots about yourself. So if you jump on over to nurseleaders.ca, you'll find all that information there. And so Justin, last thing I want to ask from you is a story from your nursing career that had an impact on you. It can be funny, it can be sad, it can be anything you want it to be, just something that when you think of your nursing career, a story that comes to mind.
Oh gosh, Amy. There have been so many. Wow. We are blessed to be in the career that we are. We have such vulnerable, candid conversations with people that touch us so deeply. Oh gosh, I think a really pivotal moment in my nursing career actually happened during my third year of undergraduate schooling in Medicine Hat. We were assigned my group for our community nursing project, vulnerable populations. And we sat around and conversed on how we could best engage with the Homeless Society in Medicine Hat. And we decided to go homeless for 3 days. It was all that we were allowed to go homeless for. We were working closely with the Salvation Army and trauma groups, and the research showed that if we had gone longer than 48 hours, that's when adverse mental health effects start to appear. So we were allowed to go for 36 hours. Nobody knew what we were doing. We traded in our clothes, our cell phones. We had no money. This wasn't advertised. We told nobody that we were students, and we roamed the streets. We slept in the TD Bank entranceway on the Friday night. It was February 1st. It was freezing. There was snow on the ground. Drunk people came in and out getting money and literally did not see us and walked over us. We walked and walked and walked and walked. 36 hours when you're homeless feels like 36 years. I will just say that. My heart just goes out to that plight. So we went to the library one day. I remember falling asleep, and some lady called security and said, "There's a man sleeping on the floor over there," and I was that man. So I was brutally woken up. We went to the shelter because we finally just needed refuge, and we just went to the shelter. And it was that experience. I'm just getting emotional thinking about it still.
Yeah.
In addition to some other things, really changed everything. I thought I will not be one of those nurses. I would, like, just for myself, I will not be one of those. I cannot work in a career where I can, how do I say this? I don't want to be stuck in the same job affecting change on a small level. What I realized in that moment was the power of my profession's voice to be able to attack some of these social justice issues. Nursing is positioned to be social justice champions on a number of issues, and that experience just opened my eyes for me about the possibilities to affect change that my profession could offer. And I always keep that story, those people that I met on that journey, very near and dear to my heart in everything that I do. And I always make sure that whatever it is that I'm doing, that it is influencing and bettering other people. And it was that experience that made me realize that I was a part of the human family.
That is, I have no words for that story. Thank you for sharing it. It just shows the power of stepping into somebody's shoes and getting that learned experience. And also, our whole entire vision statement at the International Network of Nurse Leaders is that we believe nurses have the power to change the world. So that sums it up perfectly. I mean, we have the ability to come together and put a collective voice as nurses behind those causes that can make a difference. So thank you for bringing awareness to that. And with that, unless you have anything else you would like to add, we are going to be done for today.
Thank you very much, Amy. It was great. I was a little nervous, but it was a really great experience and a really great conversation. Thank you so much for doing this. This is just it's so great to see a nursing podcast on Apple Podcasts.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I really appreciate that. And for your stories. For anybody that's looking to connect with Justin, we will make sure that his social media handles are linked in the show notes, and as well the resources and things he's mentioned will be also linked in the show notes, which are available on whatever app you are listening to this podcast or on our website at nurseleaders.ca/podcast, and you just click on Justin's picture and all the information will be there. So thank you so much again, Justin, for joining us, and everybody have a great day. And nurses, we really do have the power to change the world. Hi, nurses. I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Shift Change podcast. I want to take a moment and talk to you about something really important that's happening this year. As you probably know, World Health Organization designated 2020 as Year of the Nurse and Midwife. And while it's important to celebrate the nurses and participate in all these events that are happening, we need to make sure that we are being strategic about making this the year that we really use our collective voice to raise the profile and status of nurses and advance our profession. Understandably, some of you may feel resistance to this call to action. After all, how can we expect nurses to raise the profile and status of nurses and advance the profession when oftentimes nurses aren't even getting a proper break to sit down, eat something, or even use the bathroom on their shift? But you know what? If we don't act and act now, nothing will ever change. No one is coming to save the nursing profession from the burnout and exhaustion, from the staffing crises and nursing shortage, from the violence and bullying, from the budget cuts, and all the other threats to our profession that we are currently facing. Only we can save ourselves. And that can only happen when we decide enough is enough. We must decide that this is the year that we are going to use our collective voice to shout our value to the world, to introduce innovative and revolutionary ideas into healthcare, to advocate for our patients and our profession, to shed the just a nurse mentality and claim our position as leaders, and in doing so, change our profession. This year, 2020, Year of the Nurse and the Midwife, you get to decide. Is this the year that everything changes? Is this the year that we finally say enough is enough and break through the status quo? Is this the year that you, yes, each one of you, decide that you are tired of just complaining and actually put in the work to make a change? Because the truth is, it is up to us. And nothing changes if no one changes. Let me say that again. Nothing changes if no one changes. There is a movement happening and it needs you. We are stronger together. Come join us as we disrupt the status quo and evolve our profession. It's time. It's our time. We're stronger together, so let's get started. If you want to know how you can join the movement of change, visit nurseleaders.ca/2020nurse to opt in for a free 3-part video series about how we can use 2020, the Year of the Nurse and Midwife, as the year we use our collective voice and lead our profession forward. So jump on over to nurseleaders.ca/2020nurse for all the details. I'll see you over there.